Well, welcome everyone. Once again, I am Rodrigo Dominguez. I am researcher of CICS.NOVA in the University of Minho. And today we're going to host researcher Natalia Tumas, which is affiliated to the Department of Political and Social Sciences, the research group on health inequalities, environment, employment conditions, knowledge network at Universitat Pompeu Fabra and Johns Hopkins. She's also Marie Curie Postdoctoral Fellow in Pompeu Fabra University, and she was developing her research with us in CICS.NOVA as well. And today she's going to present her work in progress, her research on gender and social inequalities in excess weight in Ibero-America, evidence and implications for urban planning. Natalia, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your research with us. So the floor is yours. You have 25 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Rodrigo, and well, hi everyone. Thank you for having me, for the invitation to join this meeting, this seminar, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to start the presentation, and I would like to start with a brief introduction about the postdoctoral project I'm currently working on. This is a Marie Curie postdoctoral project entitled Shifting the Obesity Epidemic in Ibero-American Cities, Applying Interdisciplinary, Intersectional, and Intersectoral Approaches. And regarding the background for this project, I would like to point it out that the pandemic of excess weight is one of the most important public health concerns worldwide. I also would like to say that tomorrow is the World Obesity Day, so it's a nice opportunity it's really nice to have the opportunity to speak about obesity today. And well, we also know that the pandemic of obesity, the prevalence of obesity, almost reached from 1975, and now we have a pandemic, not only regarding obesity, but also regarding excess overweight. Excess weight involves both overweight and obesity. Also, obesity is a main driver of non-communicable diseases and is a main cause of preventable mortality. And also, we know that the social and gender inequalities in overweight and obesity are a key factors or concerns to improve population health, but also gender equity and overall social justice. It's also important to mention that excess weight is also related with other growing global issues. Excess weight is also related with urbanization and with social and gender inequalities. Approximately almost 0.5% of world's population lives in urban areas, and almost 40% of the adult population lives with excess weight. And in parallel, social and gender inequalities are very important concerns worldwide. These growing global issues have a lot of links. Just to mention some of them, overweight and obesity and social inequalities are higher in more urban areas. Also, obesity is more prevalent and more unequal societies, and important social gradients and gender inequalities in excess weight were noted. So, given all this, links between this global phenomenon, it's really interesting to analyze what are the determinants of social and gender inequalities in overweight and obesity in different social and urban environments. And the Ibero-American regions is an interesting transnational scenario for this analysis, because these regions have some similarities and also a lot of the heterogeneity. Regarding the similarities, it's important to mention that it's a highly urbanized region. Almost 70% of population living in urban areas, and also the region has strong bonds, historical, political, economic, and cultural. But also the region is very heterogeneous in terms of the prevalence of overweight and obesity, also in the degree of urbanization and in the degree of social and gender inequalities. Since no country has successfully reversed the epidemic of overweight and obesity, innovative and more comprehensive approaches are urgently needed to tackle overweight and obesity. And among them, the interdisciplinary approach, the intersectional approach, and the intersectoral approaches are increasingly recognized as promising avenues to tackle, to assess, to analyze, and to tackle the overweight and obesity epidemic. However, the evidence on these integrative approaches is still scarce in the Ibero-American region. So the objectives of my project are: first, to analyze the association between social and gender inequalities and overweight and obesity in Ibero-American cities from an interdisciplinary and intersectional perspective. Then to analyze overweight and obesity prevention public policies in selected Ibero-American countries from an intersectional perspective. And last, to develop recommendations for policies and interventions to address social and gender inequalities in overweight and obesity in cities of Ibero-America from an interdisciplinary, intersectoral, and intersectional perspective. Through this aim, we will be able, or we expect to be able, to show some implications for urban planning. So in a nutshell, this is a kind of a schematic overview of my project, which is a mixed method study with a cross-sectional multi-city study, followed by a public policy analysis and the development for the recommendations for policies and interventions. We in the project we included 10 countries, 8 countries from the Latin American region and 2 European countries, Portugal and Spain. Well, now I would like to focus and to speak more in depth about a work we are doing with Cecilia Delgado as part of the collaborations within a research state I had the opportunity to do at CICS.NOVA recently. And well, the overall objective of the secondment or the research state was to build collaborations in the field of urban sustainable food systems and social and gender inequalities in excess weight in cities from an interdisciplinary perspective. And I would like to highlight that the complex nature of urban issues with a lot of interlinked dimensions and factors require interdisciplinary perspective, and that this is increasingly recognized and recommended. So with that in mind, we started a collaboration trying to combine different backgrounds and different disciplines. And before moving to the aim of our work, study, I would like to show you some information related to the background or the rationale to perform that work. We know that several factors, I mean social, environmental, behavioral, and biological factors, and also levels, including individual levels and contextual levels, interact to determine the burden of overweight and obesity. The nutrition transition, that is the process of changes, of shift in the diet and in the physical activity of populations that results in change in nutritional status from an initial situation of predominance of underweight to another situation with higher prevalence of excess weight. We know that this process, the nutrition transition, is faster in urban settings. And some mechanisms were proposed in the literature to explain why the nutrition transition is faster in urban settings. Well, on the one hand, living in urban settings may lead to a less energy expenditure because of less physical demanding occupations, less opportunities to exercise, and also because in urban environment are more opportunities for leisure activities, for sedentary leisure activities. And also urban food environments has a more dense availability of supermarkets, high density of food stores, restaurants, and street sellers, which increase the probability or the frequency to access to unhealthy food. But also we know that urban environments also offer considerable opportunities to access healthy food for those who can afford it. So since healthy and low dense calorie food is often frequently more expensive than unhealthy and high dense food, the urban poor are more likely to have access to the latter. So in urban areas, the inequalities in excess weight are higher because there are both opportunities to access to healthy and unhealthy food intake. And so living in urban areas might have different impact in body mass index depending on the social position of the individuals. That's why it's very important to consider the social and gender inequalities when we study excess weight in urban settings. Also, in terms of the rationale for our study, I would like to mention that cities are considered key to tackle social determinants, are an important factor to consider within the framework of social determinants of health. And also that to develop healthier cities, urban planners should take into account the social inequities in health. In other words, planners should know who are the groups most affected and what are the main drivers of the disparities in health. And now moving to the setting of our study, I would like to point it out that in Europe, there is also excess weight is also an important public health concern, with about almost 50% of the population, of the adult population, living with overweight or obesity. And in the Iberian Peninsula, that is Spain and Portugal, excess weight, similarly to Europe, affects approximately half of the adult population. We also know that there are some differences between Portugal and Spain related to the prevalence, to the percentage of overweight and obesity, but almost in general, they are quite similar. We also know that social position and gender are closely related to the prevalence of excess weight in both countries, Portugal and Spain. And specifically in Portugal, we know that I think that the most of evidence shows that higher prevalence of overweight and obesity were found among individuals with lower education and among women. And in Spain, most evidence also shows that the excess weight is more prevalent in women and also in those who are less educated. So our aims for this work that we are doing together with Cecilia Delgado are to review the scientific literature assessing the gender and social inequalities in excess weight in the Iberian Peninsula, and then to analyze what are the implications of these findings for urban planning, and to develop recommendations for urban policies and interventions to tackle excess weight. So we have two components. This is a work in progress. We are in the first step. And I can now I will show you, I'm going to show you some key points of the methodology we are applying to develop this review. So in terms of the literature search strategy, a literature search was conducted in PubMed, and we used the following string search terms, that is different synonyms of excess weight, overweight, obesity, plus inequalities, disparities, equity, unequal, and different synonyms of inequalities, and also the countries that we, the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain. Regarding the inclusion criteria, we consider papers written in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. In terms of the population, we consider adults, adolescents, or children. Also original articles and researchers or studies developed in urban settings. And as exclusion criteria, we consider excess weight as non-primary outcomes. That is, for example, as a risk factor, which is quite common to a lot of studies include obesity and overweight as risk factor, but not as a main outcome. And also we exclude reviews, meta-analysis, editorials, or commentaries. And in terms of the strategy, the study selection and data extraction, first of all, the papers were screened based on title and abstract, and then a screening was applied considering the inclusion and exclusion criteria I mentioned before. And as a next step, I mentioned this is a work in progress, the next step will be the full text reading of the selected manuscript papers. And the dimension that we are going to consider to systematize the data in the full revision of the papers selected are the author's name, the publication year, the study period of time, the country, the outcome, the main outcome, that is excess weight, overweight, obesity, BMI, the study design and the population, the method, the axis of inequality that were considered in the studies, inequity-related key findings, conclusions, limitations, and most importantly, urban planning implications. So the results we have so far in this work in progress are for Portugal, a total of 48 abstracts were screened and 18 papers meet the criteria for the full revision. And in Spain, 145 abstracts were screened and about 50 papers meet the criteria for the full revision. And that's the state of our work so far, and I expect to have more results soon. And I would like to, before finishing my presentation, I would like to share with you some final reflections related to interdisciplinarity, because, well, I mentioned before that this study includes an interdisciplinary perspective, and also our collaboration and the research step was based on that kind of experience of trying to combine our different backgrounds and disciplines. And we know that interdisciplinarity is increasingly recommended in research, but also in urban planning and policy making. And we also know that interdisciplinarity has some benefits, but also some challenges. And I would like to share some reflections about that, or some points that I find like important in terms of the benefits. I think interdisciplinarity is important because it enables or allows a more comprehensive understanding of complex issues. And in the case of overweight and obesity, it's a global complex issue, so we need a comprehensive approaches. Also, another benefit is that interdisciplinarity fosters greater critical thinking, and also is important for meeting societal needs and addressing real-world issues. And it holds great potential for innovation. But also interdisciplinarity, on the other hand, has some challenges, like, for example, building a common narrative or understanding of concepts sometimes is not easy and is more time-consuming. And finding a suitable target journal could be more difficult because there are some disciplinarity boxes with different disciplines, and if you work in a kind of mixture, it's maybe a bit harder to find a suitable one. And also, to what extent we know if we are doing interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. I think that I would say that for me, it's a kind of continuum: multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity, which I think is more complicated and less frequent. But I could say in my experience that we start with the interactions doing multidisciplinarity, which include different disciplinary perspectives in an additive way. And then we move to interdisciplinarity to combine different disciplines. And then at that point, the disciplinary boundaries seem to start to break down. And then the transdisciplinarity just is like another stage. I think that's more complicated, where the disciplinarity boundaries are not evident, and a new holistic outcome emerge. But just final reflection about interdisciplinarity, and I think that you may have a much more aspect or item to add to this list, and it would be great to hear from you and to learn from your experiences as well, if you want, of course. Well, that's all I have. Thank you very much, and obrigada. And if you have any questions or comments, I will be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Natalia. It was a great presentation. It's a very interesting topic that you are doing your research. I will use my prerogative as the chair of this session. I'll put you a couple questions, and then we open the discussion with the rest of the audience. So, on the very early stages of your presentation, you're just mentioning the question of overweight due to inequality. But my question to you is, what role social related to you talk a lot about inequality or social inequality. But my question to you is, how much of this social inequality is also overlaps with race issues, with racial issues, with structural racism, segregation, discrimination? And of course, this also leads us to think about biological and medical differences between white population and Black population, for instance, and how those two aspects also interplace inside your research. Question one. Question two, It's very interesting to notice that you're doing a Latin American framework. It's the scope of your work, of your research. But do you think that it's possible to do similar approach in terms of local dynamics or regional dynamics, eventually in terms of behavior patterns? Do you think that it's possible to do this kind of approach for different regions of different countries within the scope of your work? For instance, do you think that this overweight and obesity related to social inequalities in specific parts of South America, for instance, southern parts of Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, that have very similar patterns of calories consumption, have very similar patterns of social distribution? Mm-hmm. Could they be similar, for instance, to specific parts of other parts of South America or some parts in Iberian Peninsula, for instance? Do you think that this regional approach also works beyond this national framework that you're trying to work with? That's question number 2. Thank you. Now you have a few minutes to answer the 2 questions, then we open to the discussion to the rest of the audience.
Well, thank you, Rodrigo, for your questions, which are very interesting. Regarding the first question raised about race and ethnicity, when I mentioned social axis of inequality, I meant different social variables. For example, individual education, race, ethnicity, gender, migration status, and employment conditions, income. I didn't focus in each one because of the time, and I only mentioned what are the for example, individual education, I think, is the most studied social axis of inequality related to overweight and obesity. But yes, the race and ethnicity plays a role in the patterns in the distribution, the social gradient of overweight and obesity. And the point with race and ethnicity is that in Latin America we have a kind of problem with the source of data, with the health surveys. Not all the countries have information about race and ethnicity, which is an issue. So we weren't able to assess the association with race and ethnicity in all in the 8 Latin American countries, because of data limitations. We have information in some countries, but not in all countries. Mm-hmm. And about the biological factors, if I understood well your question, if not, please correct me. It's possible to think in a kind of interaction between biological and social factors. I could say that yes, there's a kind of epigenetic, and also that plays a role as well. But it's a kind of a growing consensus regarding that the social feature, the social factor, the social determinants are main drivers, more important, much more important than the biological. And we also have to consider some interaction at the role that in the last decades, in the last 30 years, our physiology, biology wasn't changed a long time. But what changed a lot was our social environment, social and physical environment, with a lot of, for example, stores and convenience stores to access to different, the obesogenic environment, I mean, with a lot of opportunity to access to ultra-processed food and products, and also less opportunity to walk around our cities or our place of residence. So it's still an important factor, but not as important as the social drivers of this epidemic. And regarding the second question, I think that yes, it's that's a very good point, important point. It could be great to study in the future how the different behavioral patterns. I guess you are referring to dietary intakes or physical activity patterns, dietary patterns that could be similar in some within the region, which is quite big and heterogeneous. And I could say that, of course, South America could have some similarities, and also could be interesting to see how some similar behavioral patterns could have a different impact in the probability of having excess weight, depending on the social features of the cities. And also I would say that for example, Spain and Argentina share a lot in terms of the food habits, traditions. We have cultural bond, and also with Italy, but we are not including Italy here in our study because it's the Ibero-American region. And also it could be great to study that specifically. Yes, also I have to consider the limitations of in terms of the available data we have, mainly in Latin America. But we could, I'm just thinking about that we could make them case studies in the countries we have the information, and not in the 8 countries I'm now including this study, just to focus on that kind of question or aim in some countries and not in all countries, because we don't have all the data for all countries.
Yeah, the reason I am asking this because you are analyzing different countries with very different sizes. For instance, Brazil is a continental dimension country. So even inside Brazil, you have very different patterns due to mostly to the size of the country, of course. But this is, we'll not monopolize the debate here, so I'll open the floor to questions from our audience. You guys are welcome to address to our guest.
So I will speak a little bit, and I will connect with your comment, Rodrigo. First of all, thank you so much, Natalia, for the great presentation, and that mirrors so well the challenge that we had on working together with the different disciplines, backgrounds, and it's a challenge that we will keep working on it. So what I think it is what you were talking about countries, but this was a difficulty that we found in the when attending the methodology, because the countries are so different and the realities are so different, that the first step of the methodology that was to looking for papers connecting the two disciplines and the two topics, and was so broad, so open, that in the end, I don't know if it is clear in the presentation, we decide just to focus on Spain and Portugal, and we are still thinking about it because to compare Spain and Portugal, it's much more easy. But the idea is not to make suggestions on policy advice on the countries, but on the city. So the scale, it's much more focused. But even so, the urbanization for sure in Brazil and in other countries of America Latina is very different from the urbanization in Europe. That's why we think now that it is better to compare Spain and Portugal. But as Natalia has said, the challenge was in the beginning to find a common narrative, because it's so interesting, because we look so so similar in interest. We are both research, but our background, they are very, very different. And even if it is an interesting topic to merge, it takes time to build a common narrative. In the end, if we are able, that is, and again, a challenge, the idea is to understand, for instance, if in the cities there are more opportunities to walk between working places and food assets and so on, and if this is a way of reducing the obesity level of our target. So, and we found some papers that are trying to go on that way, but there's a lot of information missing, because this is interdisciplinary approach on planning and obesity is quite new. So there is a space for innovation, we guess. But what we found was more an analysis comparing regions, for instance, comparing cities, but not the urban planning assets that is in the end our final target. So I don't know, Natalia, if you want to add something to what I said.
Thank you, Cecilia, for your comments. Yeah, I think that most of the studies are epidemiological studies, and there's a kind of lack of development of or the urban implications. So it's not, or the urban assets are not so often being considered. So that's why we thought that we could make two aims in our work. The first one, the review, and then as we identified that most of the papers lacks or is not very common to consider the urban planning dimensions, then we propose to analyze what are the implications of the findings, and to develop recommendations for urban policies and interventions. That's just a kind of contribution to fill the gap, or to try to contribute to fill the gap, and to also recommend for future studies to keep in mind, to consider these the dimensions, the urban planning and urban assets, and because it's important to generate actionable evidence. Otherwise, we will still face this pandemic.
But at this point, we are not really sure how deep we can go on the comments, because there is no information on the literature review, and that's like about this about the connection between planning at the scale of the road or the neighborhood. The connections or the links between the topics are really at big scales. So eventually, one of the recommendations is to study, to go deeper on this, to make a zoom in, to understand what are the implications of the urbanized spaces and the obesity.
Yes, I'll jump on this also, because I think that this matter of urban planning, or the urban organization or space organization that we're just discussing, also reflects in the framework that Natalia is using. And this, with the point that I made before on the eventually regional approaches, so it could be easier to compare even between Portugal and Spain.
For sure.
Specific regions, for instance, could be with similar patterns of urban planning. For instance, to compare Alentejo with Castilla-La Mancha, for instance, or compare northern Portugal with Galicia, which they have similar patterns of urban distribution or urban planning or urban organization, as if you said.
Totally
Of course,
true.
there are some
But
limitations
there
in
is
terms
no
of
literature on that. So-
literature on that, of course. This could be a challenge to give the first step eventually in terms of producing this new literature of this new field, right? I'll open the floor for more questions from the audience. Does everyone has any more questions, more comments? So if nobody mentions anything, so I will thank you, Natalia. I'll thank Natalia to present.
Rudy, can I add something?
Yes,
That's
yes, of
the
course.
challenge of interdisciplinary issues.
Yes.
It takes time to process how we can manage.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a permanent work in progress, a permanent challenge. So if we don't have any more questions, I will finish this session. I would like to thank Natalia to share her research with us today. And I will give you a final warning here, which is next session we will have on April 14th, another researcher, which will be Beatriz Roque from our research group #1, and she will present her research as well on gender transition, representations of health professionals in the perspective of transgender users. So thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll be here again for another interesting session of discussion on new research. Thank you everyone and have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.